Level Up is a regular podcast that brings you topics to help you perform at work and in life at your very highest level. Your host is Dan Kyoto, an executive coach, corporate trainer, and author. He is president of Impact Training and Executive Coaching. And now, here's Dan.
Thank you, Jesse. As always, I appreciate that. Here we are on Level Up. Level Up is your link to lifelong learning. So a topic today is all about audiences, knowing your audiences. How do you create products and services and programs without knowing your audience? So we'll be talking about that today. But first, I want to introduce my guest. And this guest has been a stellar radio and television personality, so hopefully I won't screw this up. Now, I'd like to introduce her. Her roots are in Oklahoma. She was in the Midwest, went to a university there, and then went to Hollywood, California. After about 4 years, she came back to the Midwest to teach speech and drama. And along with that, she was also at an ad agency and was a television producer. She was the star, too, in Janet and Friends on Ellis Island, and produced and hosted an award-winning children's program called Kids Connection. But for 22 years, she worked in the country capital of the world, Branson, Missouri. She and her on-air partner, they were the human alarm clocks to wake up the Ozarks with Steve and Janet in the morning. And not too long ago, though, she hung up her earphones, but a little bird tells me that she still is in the business. Now, not every radio personality can make you feel special, but this person does. Not every radio personality cares about their audience and is just the kind of person, when you get to know her, genuinely cares about people, but she is. And it makes all the difference in the world. But that's my guest. So I'd like to introduce you to Branson's Janet Ellis. Welcome to Level Up, Janet.
I am so excited to be with you, Dan Kyoto. It is my pleasure, and I'm so honored and very impressed that you asked me to be a part of this program.
Oh, you're just such a great fit for it because we try to learn new things. And when we get someone with your personality and your experience, I just want to tap into that and ask you all kinds of questions. So,
okay.
Shall we begin?
Uh-huh.
All right. Excellent. So let me ask you this. You were a drama major and taught speech and drama, and then ended up in radio. So what's the correlation there? How did you get that job in radio?
You know, it's very interesting, Dan, the drama people in my life and the actors and actresses. You said, great setup, by the way. You really encapsulated my years in that wonderful introduction. So thank you. But when I first started teaching high school, I thought, well, you know, it's the extension of the drama and the acting. And I loved those kids. I loved directing musicals and plays and teaching, but I kind of burned out. And so I thought, I really always wanted to have my own TV show. I mean, a television show, not a sitcom. I had been to Hollywood and the acting thing. It wasn't really for me. But I thought maybe a talk show, Oklahoma City talk show. We were top 36 market or so. So I went to a television station, my local NBC affiliate, and I said, I'm ready to do a TV show. And they said, sure you are. What's your resume? And my resume was, of course, college and teaching high school. So I ended up working in the television, learning the business as a producer and a writer. And then all of that led me back around to being without a job about, 10 years later, traveled with the OU University of Oklahoma football team, produced the OU playback show, the Barry Switzer show. We did all kinds of great traveling and television product. And all of a sudden, I find myself without a job in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, And I thought, what do I do next? And literally, and I'm a faith-based person, Dan, God in my right ear, when I'm driving the highway back to Elk City, Oklahoma, said, go to Branson, Missouri. Now, Dan, I'd never been to Branson, Missouri, didn't really know a whole lot about Branson, Missouri, except I knew there were some entertainers and it was music and whatever. And I thought, I sing a little, I play a little, I'll try it. And I walked in the back door of my mother and daddy's house, and my mother was baking a cake. And I said, God just told me to go to Branson, Missouri. And mother went, what? And I said, God just told me in my right ear to go to Branson, Missouri. And she said, honey, are you sure that's not that inner ear infection that you've had all these years? I promise. True story. So I came to Branson, Missouri. And there was a little television station here in Branson, Missouri. And by hook and by crook, actually, my first job was as an usher at the Japanese fiddler Shoji Tabuchi's theater. And if you've been to Branson, you know Shoji Tabuchi. So that wasn't a very long-lasting job, as I had kind of been in the theater a long time, and I thought I knew too much. So I'm on my way out the door, and this little TV station here in Branson, and they needed a producer. I'm a producer. They needed a writer. I'm a writer. So I produced a morning show. Well, that after a year ended up me getting into radio. Now, all my fancy friends in theater were like, radio? We thought it was a bad deal when you went into TV. But my TV friends went, radio? You don't want to do radio. I went in. The guy, Steve, and I had a rapport, and boom, it was magic, really pretty much from the beginning.
That is beautiful. There's something you said that I want to go back to, where you talked about moving from what you were doing in the school, that you kind of burnt out. And for some of our viewers, sometimes maybe they feel that way too. And obviously you got very excited about that next position, but what were the things that came about that made you think this isn't quite the right fit, or I'm burning out? What was that?
Really and truly, I loved the kids. I loved the interaction. We had rehearsals on the weekends. We had speech tournaments on the weekends. So pretty much it was a 7-day-a-week job. Parents were, as parents are, parents. And it was hard to get those calls at 10:30 at night. Why didn't you cast my daughter as the lead? My son's a better dancer than da-da-da. And also as the drama teacher, and I do have a background in music, I really did a lot of programs. My kids did the programs. I did programs all over town. So it was constant, just always performing, always on. I taught summer school in the summer. I would go to class in the summer. So it was really just always on, always, always, always. And I loved it. I did. I loved it. And yet that day that I woke up, and there were some extenuating circumstances with that particular place in school that I don't want to go into. But one day I just woke up and I said, I got to go. Got to go. And this was the other thing, because for 4 years I had seniors. And every time then I'd get a new freshman class in, and then those freshmen would become sophomores. And when I told my parents that I thought I was going to probably move back to Oklahoma City, this was not in a city school. It was a pretty big school, but smaller school. And my dad said, honey, are you sure? Because you're good at this and the kids love you. And I said, I know. And I've got a great group of seniors coming up this year. And Daddy said, honey, you know, you're always going to have a great group of seniors. You just need to decide what's right for you. That was it.
You know, that's interesting, too, to have a parent say, are you sure about this? I think about the times I've said that to my children just to make sure. But I love the fact that he said, whatever's right for you. You're the one that has to make that decision. So.
And my parents, the best. My parents were the people that always sponsored school trips, that my mother always brought cinnamon rolls to play practice, I would say, Mother, it's rehearsal. She'd bring the stuff to play practice. And we'd go to the ball games and travel. And they were just the best, always supportive. And my parents never, ever, ever said to my brother or myself, you can't do that. What do you think? You can't. My grandparents, the same thing. I was third generation in the town I grew up. So some of my teachers had taught my parents. So it's a small town. Everybody knew everybody. And my parents were that great force. When I went to Hollywood, that was when they were a little iffy on striking out with my best friend, Elaine, going to Hollywood.
Right. Big step.
Yeah.
But you learn what you like and what you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I like to sometimes explore with people who have worked in different fields and different jobs. For some of our CEOs who are listening, or young professionals are trying to figure out what's the right culture for me, what are some of the working atmospheres throughout your career that you would say, that was good, what happened there? And you may have a couple you say, well, I was somewhere where it wasn't so good. What are the things you remember?
You know, it's interesting. Growing up, I didn't have that summer job or whatever. My parents were in building and real estate. And so after I was in between, just before I graduated college, I sold real estate with my grandfather and my daddy. And a small town, Western Oklahoma, and there were about probably 6 or 7 real estate agents in town, and my grandfather was the best. And I was the only female there was one other female, and she was like 89 when I started. All the guys were older. I mean, seriously, I'm talking 50s, 60s, 70s when I was like 21. And so that was a very interesting in, I loved to go and show the house and tell the people what they could make it their own and how their family would grow in this house. But I hated talking about the money when it would come down to the negotiations. So my dad had to do that. He would go, I'll show it, I'll sell it, but you do the financial thing and just let me do the fluffy stuff. So that was a great beginning to learn how to talk to people. And when we went to Hollywood, my best friend, Elaine, God love her, God rest her soul. Elaine got a job immediately. We hit the want ads. We tried every open call for acting and everything. And she was a fabulous, fabulous actress. I was comic relief, honestly. I would play the piano. I would sing, show tunes, and I wasn't a very good actress. But I learned so much going to each audition. And when you hear next, I mean, you don't even get your first bit of dialogue out. Next, I thought, is that what I want the rest of my life to do? So I had some various and sundry jobs in Hollywood. And God love her, Elaine stayed all those years, married a boy from Hollywood High School. And unfortunately, we lost her several years ago with ovarian cancer. But she always said the same thing. Janet, you could do a talk show, you could teach high school, you could do anything you want to do. So when I came back from Hollywood and started teaching, that was a great experience. Then when I went to that next job, the TV, and Dan, I started, again, I had half my way to a mini master's, but I wanted to start at the bottom. And I wanted to learn what it was like what goes on behind the TV cameras. And this was just, an NBC affiliate, as I said. And I started at the bottom. I mean, I picked up dry cleaning for talent. I did scheduling, all of those things. And we were in the post room. The crew was all on a trip to Austria. And I was in the post-production room with one photog. And that's when the Challenger exploded. And we're in this room with 10, 12 monitors. And that was history. And that was incredible. And I mean, a lot of our lives changed, obviously, as a nation, changed. And it kind of laid the groundwork for some things that happened while I was actually on the air some years after that. So with the TV, learning and working my way up, when they'd say, A lady that worked at ESPN told me one time, she said, Janet, if you want to be on or behind the scenes, you need to learn to schlep. And I didn't know really what schlepping was, but I learned to schlep. So when I got my own TV show and it was talent of sorts, man, I toted my own equipment. I wasn't afraid to, hang lights, all of those things, because it taught me a really, really good ethic. And then a very good friend of mine who is a producer, finally she goes, you're a talent. Let them do the schlepping. So I don't know. I still schlep a little.
Well, I think there's a great advantage to that, just from what you're saying about when you start to do all those jobs, you then appreciate them, you understand them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly.
That gives you a better knowledge base, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, I worked with a variety of talents, brothers. I worked with some wonderful women, newscasters, sports people. And the thing about it, I learned if you don't get too full of yourself, you're always going to be able to understand maybe where somebody else is coming from. Right. And that's really why I wanted to relate to my audiences, and then coming full circle, producing those TV shows. Dan, oh my word, when we had a show called The Spirit of Champions, it was a syndicated show, and we had this small independent production company, and our coach, Barry Switzer, who had been the coach of the University of Oklahoma football team, he was out of the football business, and he was our talent. And we would travel and do a show with a celebrity or an athlete who had overcome personal obstacles to achieve the greatness. We interviewed Tommy Lasorda on third baseline of Dodger Stadium. Kathy Rigby, our first real hopeful gymnast for the Olympics. She was doing Peter Pan at the Pantages in LA. Nolan Ryan, before his sixth no-hitter. Of course, he went on, little guy from Alvin, Texas, went on to do 7 and great things. I mean, we even were at the Rockingham house of O.J. Simpson. When OJ was, this would have been 91 and 1991. And he had come through some real scrapes with Nicole. But I have these pictures of that house and where he was putting golf and all of those things. Just fascinating experiences.
That is great. That is great. Now, a little question as you speak, and you speak so well, you're so eloquent.
Oh.
And as you speak, I have to ask this question because I lived in Missouri and refused to call it Missouri. And I want to know, because every place I've lived, there's some local dialect of how you pronounce things.
Right.
How do you become schooled if you're from that area, Oklahoma, Missouri? Is there anything, how do you speak the way you do so eloquently? Do you have to learn that?
When I went to OU as a freshman, University of Oklahoma Drama School, I came back after 2 weeks. I'm sorry about that. 2 weeks. And I was home for a visit. And my mother, as I was getting ready to leave to go back, said, honey, what happened to your twang? And I said, what? No, actually, I said, what do you mean, mother? And of course, after 2 weeks of dialogue coaches, I got over that. What, mother? How could you be so insensitive to my diction? And just basically, I wasn't very good with accents, but I kind of got to the place where the dialogue wasn't exactly as Southwest, Midwest as I had grown up. Now, if I spend some time there, for sure, that y'all and all of that thing like that will come back out. But for the most part, it's just the way I talk now.
It's wonderful.
Mother.
That's great. So let's take a break. And then I want to come back and I want us to talk about our topic today of audiences. So we'll spend with that. So this is Dan Chiodo. My guest today is Janet Ellis, and she is so resilient and so full of a rich history in terms of broadcasting. We've heard a little of that, and we'd like you to return. And gosh, it's coming back to me now. Y'all come back just a little bit. And yes, you are listening to Level Up.
At Express Employment Professionals
in Gulfport, Mississippi,
in Springfield, Illinois,
in Bend, Oregon,
in Champaign, Illinois,
in Corpus Christi, Texas,
in Jersey City,
in Fishers, Indiana,
here in Knoxville, Tennessee.
We're on a mission.
We're on a mission.
We're on a mission. We're on a mission.
A mission. A mission.
A mission.
A mission.
Mission.
We're on a mission to put 1 million people to work.
Welcome back. We're on the flip side of this episode for Level Up. This is Dan Chiodo, and my guest today is Janet Ellis, the voice of Branson. She's told us about her experience in radio and television, and now we're going to talk about your audience, because as I said in the beginning, we really do have to know our audience. So, Janet, how important do you think that is, to know your audience?
I think it's incredibly important because not everybody will be pleasable. And you might, now we were early morning, 6 to 9, 6 to 10 for some years. And Steve and I worked tandem, kind of good cop, bad cop. I was the dingy blonde. He was the family guy, kind of surly sometimes, like the mischievous little brother. And so we played off that with each other. And so the audience, you have to grow that audience too. You have to build that audience. So the locals were a very big part of that, because we wanted to catch people when they wake up in the morning and they have their radio on in the bathroom or in the kitchen or whatever, driving to school, lots of moms, giving weather reports. And it was very important to be that local connection with news and weather and the things going on in our area. But we were also a huge tourist attraction town. And so we counted on tourists as well, a lot, to be a part of our audience.
Interesting. So how do you balance that? Now you're talking to two different audiences, yet the show would be the same show. So is there anything you did to make sure you were talking to both audiences? We
had a man who was guiding us, and he said, you're being too local. You're being too local. And the stories that I've told you, oh, my word, the audience, even though I've been retired 6-7 months, the audience will still identify my mother as J.E. That was her nickname that Steve gave my mother, 90 years old, J.E. She became a celebrity in her own right. And people that came back year after year, we had some visitors that even would follow us and know that my mother is, how's J.E.? What's going on? How's Elk City? All of those things that were personal, but yet we still used it as a relatability. Now, in a small town, you need locals to keep your restaurants and your different businesses, dry cleaning, all of those things. You need that local clientele. But the people that were visiting us, they also want to know where the good places to eat were and what was good to see at the theaters and are there any special deals? And so we would incorporate that too. We had, very special relationship with that visiting audience. And so I was always keenly aware that there would be locals and somebody who didn't know what the Sam Hill we were talking about. So you kind of have to encapsulate that a little bit differently for both audiences. I like that, because really a lot of us have to talk to more than one audience. So you have to tailor it toward that. Mm-hmm. Again, that's a real tightrope that you walked there, to be talking to both of them at once. I love the fact that you said that some people would come back
to vacation and still remember your mother and some stories about that. That's incredible. So
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say that I watched several kiddos, not only our locals, seriously. I did a story when first graders started their school 12 years ago. It would be last year, 12 years ago. I did a story. I did a video on our kids show, Kids Connection. It was with kids, for kids, about kids. I was the host, and I was with these kindergartners going into the first grade. And then they graduated last year. And I caught up with some of them, followed them, all of them that I could through their high school career. And of course, last year was such a dubious year of education and sports and activities and all those things. But it was so interesting to follow them and see how they grew and see what they wanted to be when they grew up back in, 12 years ago, and now what they're going on to study. Likewise, some of the people who have come to visit us, I've watched them with their families. We have multi-generational families coming back year after year. They go to Silver Dollar City, they go to Titanic, they go to the different attractions. And it's interesting when I would do those live radio broadcasts out and about, they'd come up and they'd say, "We met you back in 1998. Remember us?" Sometimes I do, but you know what? I always try to make them feel like it was a very special thing to meet them then and see them again.
And that is really a good thing to remember about your audience too. Make them feel special, kind of like they're.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, the other thing, I've heard you on radio before, and you're just spectacular, and
thank you.
You are up all the time. I have a client that they're more of a behind the scenes operation. It would be a physician's office. And when they meet in the morning after they have their morning huddle, when they walk out the door, there's a big sign that says, "And now you're on stage," so that they remember when they're out there with patients, they're on stage. But you really were. I mean, you were on stage for all those millions of people to listen to, vacationers or local people. How hard is that to be upbeat every day, even when maybe it's not the best day in your life?
That's an excellent question, because obviously a trained actress from the University of Oklahoma, but still, sometimes you just don't feel good, or you've got a headache, or maybe you and your partner, Steve, had an argument during that last commercial break, and there were those times, but you can't let that audience know unless it's a bit, and I just got mad at Steve because he wouldn't let me have my Diet Coke on the air, whatever it was. And you have to be there for them because maybe they just lost their spouse, or maybe their kids have gone to college and they're empty nesting. And we were that connection when they took their kids to school all those years. So it was a big responsibility. And I will tell you also, my partner, Steve, who was just like family, we were family. We really were. His parents lived local, and my parents were in Oklahoma. So when they would come to town, he was very good with my parents, and I loved his parents so very much. And Labor Day, it was like 8 years ago or however long, on Labor Day, his father was killed in a car accident, just probably 2 miles up the road from my house. And so I knew his parents well, and his mom was hurt, but was going to be okay. And I said, we were talking that night, and I said, I'm going to have somebody do that show tomorrow, because obviously he wasn't going to be there. But he was like, "No, partner, you have to be there. You have to be there for RH." That's his dad. And he said, he loved you on the radio. And I said, but I mean, I don't think I can do that, Steve. Anyway, so every news story, 6:30, 7, every news story started with the story about station manager Steve Willoughby's father killed in a car wreck, and I would have to come right back on after that. And honestly, I probably wasn't very professional, but I was there because he wanted me to be there, and he knew that his mom and his dad would want me to be there and be as strong as I could be. And so I did it, and it was the most horrible 3 hours of my life on air, pretty much. But and I got text. I'll tell you what revolutionized our morning show was the text line, because for a long time, and if anybody listened to the radio growing up or whatever, you're calling number 5, you're calling, we used the phone a lot. And then the text line became so important, and people would text, and I'd get a bloop, and I'd look down, and it's like, hang in there, Janet, we're behind you, and there were people rooting for me. And it wasn't about me. It was about the honor that I had for his family, and that he had requested that. So that was a very difficult day. And then you pick up, and each day you get a little bit stronger.
That's right.
There was also yes, go ahead.
No, you tell me your story.
There was a big day that happened in September, and September 11th of 2001. And we were on the air. At the time, the studio was really tiny, little studio, and Steve was running the board. And I was literally standing behind the door, and the big plate glass window looked into the newsroom, had a little newsroom with some our news guys working, and we were doing a contest. And so Dr. Huffman, orthopedic surgeon, called in on the contest. It was going to be a winner. And he said, on the air, he said, my wife just said that a plane flew into the Twin Towers in New York. And Steve at first thought he was kind of joking or what. He's like, what are you talking about? And I could see in there in the newsroom with their TV, and we watched as the second plane flew into the Twin Towers. And of course, all of the alarms are going off. I mean, emergency alerts and all of these things. So we literally were on the air at 9/11 and broadcast until we sent it to the networks. And that was another thing that when you know your audience, or when the world is watching as America deals with this, and how you honor what happened and remember what happened, but when you go on, when you start going back to rebuilding what normalcy is. And that was very difficult.
Yes, I can imagine. The national occurrences or something like Steve's father to happen, that is tough. So during your life, was there ever a time that you faced something that you had to go on the air not feeling your very best?
Well, actually, I was very active with Relay for Life. If you're familiar with Relay for Life, with the American Cancer Society, where each year we would have this wonderful slumberless party where people raise money for the American Cancer Society. So I was always very, very active with Relay for Life. And especially after my dear friend Elaine passed away with ovarian cancer, I just felt like it was very important to raise awareness for all kinds of cancers. And so actually in September, the end of September of 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. I mean, I went in for my mammogram like I do every year. And sometimes they call and go, oh, there's a little blip here. Come back in. Let's make sure it's just a little blip. And so that happened. And all that week, my mammogram was Monday, and Tuesday I went back in for another mammogram. And Wednesday I had a sonogram. And Thursday I had a needle biopsy. And then that whole week led into the next week. And then I had a lumpectomy and I had cancer. And so I was still going to work in the mornings and didn't say anything for the first basically 2 weeks. And so I had surgery set up and plan of action. And again, I don't have any breast cancer in my family. I had no symptoms, nothing. And so the morning I decided, I really did pray about it. And I thought, the message I got was, you need to tell people to get their health checks. You need to get that mammogram. You need to know your body because it can happen to you. And so I did. I shared my story. And the outpour of support and emotion and love and help was unbelievable. But pretty much I worked through that. I mean, I had surgery and chemo and all. And the thing about I always had, well, in my day, long blonde hair, long hair. It was about, neck length or whatever. And I was worried about my hair, my stupid hair. I was like, I'm not a very pretty girl, but I have pretty good hair. And so deciding what to do about my hair. So I turned it into an audience thing with a text. Should I shave my hair first? Should I have a party and do it? Should we do it? Of course, selling, radio time is very funny. I gave it a lot away. But at that time, see, Steve had gone on the year before to do his own pathway, his next level up for himself. And so I was by myself on air, and it was Janet and friends on Ellis Island. So basically I had an even more connection one-on-one with that audience. So they helped me with deciding to just see how I felt and see when my hair started coming out and all of that. And so sure enough, the winter of 18, I was bald as a cue ball, and 3 of the other guys at work were kind of bald normally. So we did a lot of bald head shots together. So it was very interesting.
That's great. And I was talking about being on stage, but life happens too. And for you to share that so that people know that they're not alone in something like that.
Absolutely. And the nursing staff and the women's center here in Branson, all my doctors were great. And I won't say that it was a walk in the park and it was smelling roses and all that. But here's the deal. I came through it, and I'm so glad I had that experience. And as a result of talking to those women and men can get breast cancer too, talking to them, the Women's Health Center here said that there were a lot of people, and it wasn't about me, it was the message. It wasn't about Janet told you to, but women came in, and actually 3 women were diagnosed with breast cancer as a result of getting their mammograms the next month.
Wow. That's, well, it shows the power you have. Just to get the message out there. I think that's good. Well, now, this just in. I think I'd like to hear, or viewers would like to hear, all these years on radio, maybe you have a story about a star. Now, we don't have to name the star unless you want. But anything we might like to hear.
Well, I'll tell you, because we had a lot of visitors that would come into town to do shows and things. And so we usually tried to get, we would try to get an interview with them before their show or whatever they were doing, any kind of press that they were doing. And I did some press with a couple of people. And this is Dan, you do interviews. The person that you ask a question that is not a yes or no answer, and they say yes or no. And I will tell you, that is the hardest thing. Actually, there were 3. There was a female, bluegrass champion woman that it wasn't that she was being rude. She just didn't like to do the interviews. And it was yes, be. So I would try to do a follow-up question that you couldn't answer yes or no. And then to be no, be. It was the longest 7 minutes of my life. There was also Wilford Brimley. He was a yes or no-er himself. He was yes or no. But we had a guy that his name was John Davidson. John Davidson was Hollywood Square's host back in the day. And he did a Vegas show, and then he had a show here in Branson. And I'll tell you, he was a great entertainer. It didn't matter if he had 10 people in the front row and that was it in the theater, or if he was full, 1,500 people. He sold that show, to the back of the house. But he stopped by one day, and we had a mutual friend, he and I, from his days on Hollywood Squares. And so, we'd connected a little bit. So he dropped by the radio station one morning. And so Steve's like, oh, it's John Davidson. Come on in. Yeah. And so we had a great visit, and he had great Hollywood stories. Of course, you can imagine all the stars on Hollywood Squares back in the 80s and early 90s, I guess. And so Steve said, now, John, next time you've got some time in the morning, stop by and see us. And he said, well, I will. So I'm not kidding you. For a week, he came in like every day. And now I will tell you, we had a schedule of sorts. I formatted the show 3 hours a day, and he would just show up. And so finally, Steve said, buddy, we like you. You've got great hair, but you can't. He said, but you told me I could just stop by anytime. Okay. And that was so fun because we carried that through for many, many years. Now, there was a country star who is, and I'm talking from back in the 80s, and he has brothers, and he is the lead of the brothers. And he came in on and agencies arranged for that. And he came in and he cocked back in that chair, kind of rocked back and forth. And he was just too good to be talking to two old podunks from Branson, Missouri. And again, I'm trying to be up, and I'd done my research and da-da-da-da. And he just was too cool for school and could not be bothered by being with old Steve and Janet in the morning. So the next time, and again, it doesn't make them look so good, if I'm trying to reel in the big one and they don't even want to take the bait, it's not pleasant. So then we got to know his siblings, and one sibling of his and I had clashes about college football rivalries and politics. And so we would have friendly conversations. And Steve, back in the day, that was when it got kind of real. And Steve's like, "Hey, kids, don't play nice." But sometimes he would just get on my one last nerve. Now the other brother was so sweet. Oh, he was sweet, and he was always wonderful, and we just had the best time. But the middle brother was the one that one day I was out of gas, and I couldn't even drive my car home because I was out of gas. And that man grabbed my keys when I wasn't looking, and he went and filled my car up. Okay. Came back in and made a comment about my political beliefs and the fact that because of his political beliefs, he could afford to fill up my car. And then he was in about, 2 weeks later or so. And he came back in and we had a disagreement on the air. He walked off the show, and he hadn't been on the air with me since. And that was 2 presidential terms ago.
Wow.
But if we saw each other again, it wouldn't be a real, hard edge conversation, but just, some interesting things. The Lennon sisters have been here for years, and I love them. I love that Lennon family. And I'm dating myself. Obviously, those of you who've watched the Lawrence Welk show, and Andy Williams had his theater here. Andy was a wonderful guest, just a fabulous gentleman. You talk about stories. And we've had so many of those stars guests on as well, that just, I'm a fan. I'm just a starstruck fan sometimes too. And you try to just get the best information and ask them questions that they haven't been asked before. Do a little research and find out something that that I remember we were interviewing Bruce Jenner when he was Bruce Jenner back on the Spirit of Champions. And I always did Coach's research and questions for that show. And Coach asked him a question, and Bruce Jenner said, wow, I've never been asked that before. That's amazing. And that is as a researcher or as a producer or writer, that's the best thing you could, it was like, yay. So I strived for that. And sometimes I didn't succeed, but I tried to.
Well, I think that's a good message for our audience too, to ask the questions that no one else has asked, because we really want to know who our audience is. We have to find those things out. And also, I love the way you've talked about people and mentioned when they're humble. And I think to be humble and to walk in the shoes that others have walked in helps us to understand people better. And you always love to hear those stories about stars who still being humble. I think that's so good. Janet, thank you so much for being with us today and for spending time and telling us about your career, because so much of what you said resonates, I'm sure, with people in other careers too. And one thing I'd like to say too is that, just so you know what you bring to the table, what you've always brought to the table. When I was a newspaper publisher, we were going to have an event, and it was a good event. It was a women's event because we had a women's publication and we were going to do a special day. And you agreed to MC that event. So what you did was take a good event and make it a spectacular event, because when you walked in the room, when you walked up to that mic, when you talked to the audience, you really knew those women. When I looked at them, it's like they've known you forever, and you had them in your hands. You worked your magic. And so I've always appreciated that. And you've worked your magic today too. Okay? I'm so glad that you were one of our guests. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, Dan Chiodo. And I will tell you this. Having known you, I remember also doing your hold message when you were a newspaper producer. And that was, for Jennifer Gregory, press 205 or whatever it was. And that was such a huge treat for me. And the women's event was just, it was so well produced and so well done. And, I get nervous before those kinds of events, but I will also tell your wonderful audience out there, this man, he wrote one of the kindest, sweetest letters to some former bosses of mine that I will hold dear in my heart forever and ever. You have a sweet spirit, Dan, and I know you're helping these people. And no matter what the audience is, no matter what they're going through, I do know that nothing is permanent, just stay with it. One more beat, one more day. Don't give up, because I don't know what you might be going through, and John doesn't know what Mary's going through. And to know your audience and just to be with your audience, not try to boss them, not try to tell them what to do, but just be with your audience can make a difference in somebody's life.
I like that. Be with your audience. It can make a difference in someone's life. That's beautiful. Thank you to all of our viewers who have been here on Level Up on this very special day, special episode. And you will have show notes that you can look at and learn from. Take a look at some of what Janet said. Take one of those things and practice it. Try it yourself. Maybe ask yourself, have I been resilient in my career? Have I been happy in it? Am I doing the right thing? Should I do something else? All of those questions, and find out what your link is to lifelong learning and how that works for you. So we will save you a seat, not just a seat, a front row seat in the next Level Up. And now, Dustin, my friend, I think it's time to take us out. Cheers.
If you feel like this information was valuable to you, Dan would love it if you'd click the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or thoughts about today's episode, please leave a comment. Also, if you're a first-time subscriber, be sure to ring that bell to be notified about future episodes. To learn more about what Impact's training and development can do for you and your business, visit impactbydan.com, where you can find more information about executive coaching, corporate training, keynote speaking, and much more. Thanks so much for watching.